The bar was crowded, the music loud, but then she pressed against me, her eyes locking onto mine, and whispered, "You're mine tonight." The night felt unusually warm, even for late summer, the kind of warmth that clung to your skin and made you slightly aware of every movement. The bar was crowded but not uncomfortably so, just enough people to create a low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional laugh that cut through the music. I slid onto a stool near the corner, a safe distance from the main crowd, nursing a drink that tasted like bitter caramel and whiskey, and tried to blend in. Bars always made me a little self-conscious, even when I told myself I was just observing. There was something almost cinematic about watching people interact in these spaces, the way their expressions shifted with every word and every glance. Then she appeared. She didn't burst through the door like a storm, nor did she glide in with an obvious sense of purpose. It was subtler than that. She moved like someone completely at ease in her own skin, each step deliberate, measured, yet so effortlessly natural that it drew the eye without seeming to ask for attention. Her hair, a soft chestnut brown, caught the low, amber lights and subtle glimmers, a few strands falling casually over her face. She wore a dress that was simple yet elegant, hugging her figure without being overt, the kind of understated style that somehow made everything else fade away. Even from across the room, there was a quiet gravity to her presence, a confidence that didn't need to announce itself but was undeniable. She leaned on the bar, just a few seats down from me. The faint scent of her perfume reached me before anything else, warm vanilla, something floral, comforting and grounding. She glanced around casually, then directly at me, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. Her eyes, warm, knowing, with just a hint of mischief, locked onto mine. I looked away, then back again, aware that I was suddenly counting seconds in a way I hadn't done in months. She moved closer, navigating the small crowd with an ease that suggested she belonged everywhere. Our arms brushed, just a touch, a fleeting spark that sent a ripple of awareness through me. It was enough to make my pulse quicken, but not enough to feel intrusive. There was a balance there, a silent understanding that physical proximity could speak more than words ever could. She smiled, a small, enigmatic curve of her lips, and leaned in just slightly as if the noise around us didn't exist. Then she said it, her voice low but steady, confident, and impossibly intimate. "You're mine tonight." The words lingered in the air, and for a moment, I couldn't respond. My mind raced, curiosity, apprehension, and a strange thrill all coiling together. There was no vulgarity in her tone, no arrogance, only certainty and a kind of playful command that made me acutely aware of every inch of space between us. The warmth of her presence, the softness in her eyes, the faint brush of her hand against mine, it all made something inside me ache quietly, an unspoken invitation to step into a world I hadn't expected to find tonight. And just like that, the ordinary hum of the bar transformed. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was the beginning of something unpredictable, something entirely hers, and somehow, entirely mine too. After she whispered those words, the noise of the bar seemed to soften, fading into the background as our conversation began. She leaned a little closer, her elbow brushing mine as she gestured toward the cocktail menu, and I felt the warmth of her presence like a subtle current I hadn't expected. Her voice was low, slightly husky, carrying a playful edge that made even ordinary words feel significant. "So, what brings you out tonight?" she asked, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. There was a light in her eyes, a spark that hinted at mischief, but beneath it, I sensed a kind of quiet curiosity, an interest that felt deliberate and sincere. I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual, though I was acutely aware of how my pulse had shifted, how the air between us seemed charged. "Just unwinding," I said, and she nodded, her gaze lingering on me in a way that was both casual and intense, like she was taking me apart piece by piece but smiling while she did it. There was a subtle ease in her manner that made the bar feel less intimidating, her presence like a warm anchor in a sea of background chatter. As we talked, I noticed the small details that made her feel so real, so human. The way her fingers drummed lightly against the stem of her glass, a rhythmic punctuation to her words. The tilt of her head when she laughed, a soft, genuine sound that drew a smile from me despite myself. Even the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear seemed intimate, deliberate, a quiet way of inviting observation without demanding attention. Our conversation meandered from casual topics, favorite books, a shared taste in music, to subtle hints of personal history. She spoke of her work with the kind of satisfaction that only comes from years of experience, yet there were glimpses of vulnerability in her pauses, moments where her eyes drifted to the floor or her voice softened almost imperceptibly. And in those moments, I found myself wanting to lean in closer, to offer some sort of reassurance, or simply to be present, to acknowledge the layers beneath her confident exterior. Our hands brushed again, this time more deliberately, as she reached for her glass. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, but it left a warmth lingering, a quiet signal that words alone couldn't convey. There was an unspoken rhythm to the conversation, a back and forth that wasn't just about dialogue but about presence, about noticing the subtlest shifts in posture, the smallest changes in expression. Every glance held weight, every smile carried meaning. By the time our drinks arrived, the bar felt almost suspended around us, a world of soft lights and muted music, the ordinary chatter fading behind the intensity of this unfolding connection. She leaned in slightly to hear me over the music, her shoulder brushing mine, and I felt an odd mix of exhilaration and comfort. The attraction wasn't just physical, it was in the way she listened, the way she responded, the quiet confidence that suggested she was fully here, fully engaged, fully aware of the effect she had on me, and I suspected, enjoying it just as much as I did. By the end of that first drink, I knew this night would be unlike any other. There was tension, yes, but it was tempered with genuine connection. The playful teasing, the gentle touches, the quiet vulnerabilities, weaving together into something delicate, something electric, something entirely unscripted. And all I could think was that I wanted to see how far this night could go, one subtle, charged moment at a time. After leaving the noise of the bar behind, we found ourselves walking along a quiet, dimly lit street. The hum of traffic was distant, and the city's usual chaos softened into a gentle backdrop for our conversation. The night air was cooler now, brushing against my skin and making me acutely aware of her warmth whenever our arms brushed or our shoulders bumped. There was an intimacy in the simplicity of it, the kind that doesn't need grand gestures to feel significant. Every step we took seemed to bring us closer, not just physically, but in a way that felt quietly profound. We drifted into more personal territory, our words slowing as we shared small truths about ourselves. She spoke of her life with a blend of confidence and subtle vulnerability, revealing layers I hadn't expected. A fleeting glance at the streetlights reflecting in her eyes caught me off guard. She wasn't just beautiful, she was thoughtful, aware, carrying a quiet history in the lines of her smile. I found myself listening more intently than I ever had, noticing the way her expressions shifted, the slight tension in her shoulders when she recalled certain memories, the way her laughter carried a softness that hinted at past disappointments and triumphs alike. Occasionally, our hands brushed against each other, light, almost accidental touches, yet charged with warmth. Once, as she gestured while talking, her hand lingered near mine, hovering just above my arm before she drew it back with a soft smile. Each contact sent an unspoken message, a gentle reassurance, a shared presence that went beyond words. It was subtle, intimate, and entirely mesmerizing. I realized I was aware of every detail, the way the hem of her dress moved with the night breeze, the soft cadence of her speech, the warmth radiating from her proximity. She noticed me noticing, too. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw a flicker of acknowledgement in them, a quiet awareness that mirrored my own intrigue. There was no rush, no pressure, just a mutual understanding that this was a moment to be savored. At one point, we paused on a small bridge overlooking the darkened river below. The water reflected the faint glow of the city lights, shimmering softly, and for a moment, it felt as if we were the only two people in the world. She leaned slightly toward me, not in a forced gesture, but in a natural, unspoken invitation. I felt her presence like a gentle weight, grounding me, drawing me closer without urgency or expectation. Our conversation slowed, and we shared a comfortable silence, punctuated only by the soft sounds of the night. It was in that quiet, in the spaces between words, that I felt the depth of our connection. It wasn't about instant passion or dramatic declarations, it was about noticing, feeling, and understanding. Her subtle gestures, the warmth in her gaze, the way she carried herself with quiet assurance and occasional vulnerability, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't before. As we started walking again, the night seemed charged with possibilities. The emotional intimacy we had begun to forge left me both exhilarated and contemplative, aware of the age gap, aware of the social expectations, yet captivated by the quiet honesty and authenticity of her presence. This wasn't just a fleeting attraction, it was a connection that felt deliberate, meaningful, and quietly transformative. And I knew, with a strange certainty, that the night was as the night deepened, the streets grew quieter, and the city seemed to shrink around us, leaving just the two of us in a pocket of soft lamplight and hushed sounds. Our steps fell in sync as we walked, the occasional brush of our arms sending subtle shivers up my spine. There was a delicate balance to our proximity, not too close to feel forced, yet not distant enough to ignore. Every small touch carried weight, a gentle thrill that made my chest tighten in the most unexpected ways. She stopped at a small cafe that was still open, the warm glow spilling onto the sidewalk. We ordered hot drinks, and as we leaned over the counter to pay, our shoulders brushed once again. It wasn't accidental this time. There was intention in the closeness, an unspoken acknowledgement of the tension simmering between us. I caught myself studying the lines of her face, the curve of her jaw, the subtle movement of her lips as she smiled, the warmth in her eyes that seemed to pull me in closer with every glance. We found a quiet corner by the window, where the world outside felt muted and distant. Sitting across from each other, I was aware of every detail, the warmth radiating from her cup, the gentle rhythm of her breathing, the way her fingers occasionally grazed mine as she reached for her drink. Each fleeting touch was electric, yet comforting, a paradox that left me both exhilarated and calm. It was the kind of closeness that didn't demand anything more than attention, presence, and quiet acknowledgement. She laughed softly at something I said, and I noticed the way her hand lingered near mine on the table. When our fingers finally brushed, it was deliberate enough to send a small shock through me, a subtle confirmation of the connection we were building. I didn't pull away, and neither did she. Instead, we allowed the contact to last just a moment longer than necessary, savoring it, letting it speak the words our conversation had not yet dared to voice. At one point, she leaned in slightly to hear me over the faint hum of the cafe, and our foreheads almost touched. The warmth of her presence was overwhelming in the gentlest way, her hair brushing against my temple, her perfume mingling with the faint aroma of coffee. My heart thudded quietly, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. The subtle intimacy of that gesture, so simple, so human, felt more potent than any declaration of desire. There was an unspoken rhythm to our interaction. Pauses became meaningful, glances became confessions, and small gestures, a hand resting lightly on my arm, a soft nudge of the shoulder, felt weighty with intent. I became aware of the age difference not as a barrier, but as a layer that enriched the dynamic between us. She carried herself with a quiet assurance that came from experience, while I responded with the raw attentiveness of someone newly immersed in the gravity of a connection like this. By the time we left the cafe, the tension had transformed into something almost tangible, hovering in the air between us. Every step back into the night felt charged, every glance shared like a secret. It wasn't about rushing or forcing anything, it was about savoring the closeness, the warmth, the slow, deliberate build of desire that could speak volumes without a single word. The night had deepened, and with it, the connection between us had grown richer, more delicate, and entirely unforgettable. The night had settled into a quiet rhythm, yet beneath the calm, I felt a subtle tension stirring within me, a mixture of desire, hesitation, and self-awareness. Walking beside her, I became acutely conscious of the age difference between us. Not as a barrier, exactly, but as a lens through which I measured everything, every glance, every touch, every pause. Society's expectations hovered in the back of my mind, whispering reminders of judgment, yet none of it diminished the magnetic pull she had on me. It was a delicate dance between what I felt and what I thought I should feel, and I found myself constantly questioning the pace of my own heart. Her hand brushed mine again, this time a little more intentionally, and I felt the warmth linger longer than it probably should have. The contact was comforting, grounding even, but it also amplified the awareness of our differences, our worlds separated by experience, by time, by perspective. I watched the way she carried herself, confident, poised, yet not immune to the subtle vulnerability that surfaced in her pauses or the soft sighs she let escape when she spoke of certain memories. It was these glimpses of fragility that drew me closer, that made me want to step gently into her space without overstepping. We found a small park bench under a lamppost, the glow spilling across her face in soft halos. I hesitated, unsure if I should sit closer or leave a respectful distance. She noticed, of course, because she always did. She had a way of reading the unspoken, of seeing the currents beneath the surface. "You can sit closer," she said softly, and I felt both relief and a renewed pulse of nervous excitement. Her tone was neither commanding nor coy, simply warm and understanding, a quiet reassurance that allowed me to set aside some of my doubts. As we sat, we drifted into a lull, the kind of silence that isn't empty but charged with shared awareness. I noticed how her fingers rested lightly on her knees, how she occasionally tilted her head as if considering something deeply, how the soft edge of her smile hinted at thoughts she wasn't voicing. The hesitation I felt wasn't just mine. There was a mutual recognition of boundaries, of societal perception, and of the delicate balance between desire and propriety. Every subtle gesture, her hand brushing my arm, a lean of her shoulder toward mine, spoke volumes without words. I found myself reflecting on the fragility of the moment. The night could shift in an instant, and yet it felt suspended, held together by the quiet intimacy of presence rather than the loud declaration of feelings. Her eyes met mine for a long beat, steady and reassuring, and I felt a complex mixture of longing and restraint. There was an unspoken understanding. We were both aware of the risk, the judgment, the uncharted emotional territory, but there was also a commitment to explore this connection carefully, mindfully, and with respect for one another. The tension hung between us like a soft, pulsing current, heavy with unvoiced questions. How far could this go? Were we ready to cross the invisible lines that circled us? Yet, even as doubt fluttered at the edges of my mind, there was also exhilaration, an undeniable thrill in the slow, deliberate unfolding of this connection, the way every glance, every touch, and every word carried weight. The night wasn't just about desire anymore. It was about understanding, trust, and the careful negotiation of hearts meeting across a subtle divide. By now, the night had grown still, almost reverent, as though the world itself was pausing to let this connection breathe. The subtle hesitations and unspoken questions from earlier had transformed into a quiet intensity that hovered between us. We walked slowly along the tree-lined path, the lamplights casting long shadows that danced around us, and every step felt deliberate, as if we were both testing the air, measuring the rhythm of this fragile closeness. She stopped for a moment and looked up at the sky, the stars faint behind the city haze. Her gaze lingered for a second too long, and I noticed how the soft light caught her profile, her cheekbone, the curve of her jaw, the gentle sweep of her hair across her temple. I realized I had been holding my breath, and in that suspended silence, I felt the full weight of the moment. I wanted to reach out, to close the space between us, yet I also understood that this was a night defined by subtlety, by the slow accumulation of touch, glance, and presence. She turned toward me, and our eyes met. That look wasn't playful or teasing, it was earnest, searching, and somehow comforting. I could sense her own inner struggle, the same hesitation, the same awareness of boundaries, yet also an undeniable pull toward me. Without thinking, I reached out gently, letting my hand brush against hers. This time, the contact was intentional, but it remained soft, respectful, full of meaning without needing to cross any line. The warmth of her fingers against mine sent a ripple through me, not just of desire but of connection, an affirmation of trust and understanding. We stopped walking and leaned against the railing of a small overlook, the city lights shimmering below like liquid gold. She shifted slightly closer, the warmth of her shoulder pressing gently against mine. Our conversation dwindled into soft, honest confessions, the kind that have a quiet gravity, revealing the edges of our vulnerabilities. She spoke of her fears and her quiet disappointments, of the moments when confidence felt like a mask she wore to protect herself. And I, in turn, shared fragments of my own insecurities, the uncertainties of youth, and the ways I had been learning to navigate the adult world. There was a silence that followed, not awkward but full, filled with the weight of mutual understanding. I felt her hand lift, hesitating above mine, and then rest lightly against the back of my hand. The gesture was simple, almost imperceptible to an outside observer, but to me, it was monumental. It was trust, it was intimacy, it was a promise without words. I closed my fingers over hers, careful, deliberate, savoring the warmth and the reassurance that radiated from her touch. Her eyes met mine again, softer now, carrying a quiet yearning. I felt my heart respond in kind, a mixture of longing, exhilaration, and the tender ache of restraint. We were so close, yet nothing was rushed. Every movement, every gesture, was measured, building a tension that was both delicious and fragile. In that moment, I realized that the night had brought us to a peak not of overt passion, but of profound connection, a place where presence, touch, and vulnerability spoke louder than words ever could. The city continued to hum below, oblivious to the intimacy unfolding above, and for the first time that night, I felt completely, achingly alive, aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every small but infinite detail of her being. The first hints of dawn were beginning to touch the sky when we finally left the overlook, the city still twinkling below us as if reluctant to let the night end. Our steps were slow, almost ceremonial, as though either of us wanted the moment to conclude. The cool morning air brushed against our faces, carrying with it the faint scent of coffee shops beginning to open and the soft, comforting hint of night's fading warmth. There was a serenity in the quiet streets, a pause in the world that mirrored the stillness we felt inside. We found a small bench near a corner cafe, where the amber light spilled gently across the pavement. Sitting side by side, we let silence fall between us, but it wasn't empty, it was rich, full of unspoken words and mutual understanding. I noticed the subtle ways she relaxed against me, the gentle ease of her posture, the way her shoulder lightly brushed mine. It was intimate without urgency, a closeness that felt like home. I found myself acutely aware of the rhythm of her breathing, the slight warmth of her hand resting near mine, and the way the soft fabric of her sleeve brushed against my arm. "You know," she said softly, almost a whisper, "I didn't expect tonight to feel like this." There was a hint of vulnerability in her voice, a rare crack in the otherwise confident facade she carried so effortlessly. I turned to look at her, noticing the subtle flush of her cheeks, the way her eyes reflected both amusement and sincerity. "Neither did I," I admitted, feeling a quiet smile tug at my lips. "But I'm glad it did." Her hand found mine, fingers intertwining naturally, a small gesture loaded with meaning. We didn't need to speak. The contact said everything we both felt: trust, connection, curiosity, and a quiet acknowledgement of the night's delicate magic. There was no rush to define it, no pressure to label it, only the satisfaction of being fully present with each other in this suspended moment. We lingered there for what felt like hours, watching the city awaken. Streetlights flickered as shops began to open, the faint hum of early traffic starting to blend with the lingering echoes of the night. Every glance we shared was a conversation in itself, every gentle touch a reassurance that this connection was real, significant, and cherished. The age gap, the uncertainties, the fleetingness of the night, all of it faded into the background, replaced by a quiet certainty. What we had experienced together was meaningful and unforgettable. Eventually, the time came to part. She stood first, giving me a long, lingering look that carried warmth, reassurance, and the softest hint of promise. When she leaned in, our foreheads touched for a brief, suspended moment, her cheek brushing against mine, her hand lingering on the back of my neck. "Until next time," she whispered. I nodded, heart full, feeling the weight and sweetness of that simple farewell. As I watched her walk away, I felt a quiet glow inside me, a mixture of nostalgia, gratitude, and anticipation. The night had been everything I hadn't expected: intimate, electrifying, and profoundly human. It had shown me the beauty of connection that doesn't demand everything at once, that builds slowly, patiently, and meaningfully. I realized then that some nights leave a mark not through grand gestures, but through the gentle accumulation of presence, warmth, and honesty. And as the first golden rays of morning spread across the quiet city, I carried that night with me, a memory of subtle touches, meaningful glances, and the quiet magic of being seen.